All right, cool. So again, thanks, Josh, for the introduction. Yeah, this is Jed Knopf with CyberArk. We're going to be talking today about CyberArk's integration with Ansible automation. I kind of start things off a little bit here. Let's first of all, let's do a quick who am I? Jed Knopf. We've been working with CyberArk for about the last year and a half here in a solution engineering role, specializing in the DevOps secrets management space. But I come from a background of IT security operations over the last 13 years, working in engineering architecture. Throughout the demonstration, we can also, at the end of it, we can definitely answer some of your questions. I've lived the life a little bit. I'm also based right here in Lansing, Michigan, west a little outside of Lansing, Michigan. So that's a little bit about myself. But what are we going to talk about today? And I get really excited about Ansible. I get excited about automation. And so what we're going to talk about is, first of all, who is CyberArk? What is CyberArk? For those that maybe not familiar with who CyberArk is. But we'll dive right into the secrets management challenges that we have. Really, the problem when we start thinking about secrets across our automation tools, across our DevOps pipeline, ultimately, where we see we're using automation, we're using maybe OpenShift, Kubernetes, maybe we're moving to the cloud. Those are some areas that we start introducing some challenges of how do we secure the secrets and how do we get those systematically into the code, the scripts that we have. We'll talk a little about the solution. How does CyberArk help solve that solution for you? How does it make your life easier ultimately? And then we'll actually get into some specific integrations, and I'll walk through kind of a demo of the different options you have when it comes to ultimately getting secrets management into your pipelines or playbooks. So who is CyberArk? So at the core of what CyberArk has been doing for the last 20 years, we're a privileged access management solution, privileged access security. So when you think about it, your privileged credentials, maybe your root credentials you're using in an account. Me as a human, Jed needs to log in and SSH into a box. I need to be able to do that securely. I need to be able to log into a Windows host. We need to make sure that that credential is not just sitting out there for an attacker to grab hold of, And so at the core of what CyberArk does is vaults that, rotates that, make sure we have a unique password every time we need to use that, but also provide ways for a human to easily gain access to those tools, do things more natively. So I like to use PuTTY if I'm in a Windows box. Maybe I like to be on Bash Shell. I want to still be able to do that same workflow. I don't want to be slowed down. And CyberArk's really, that's the core of what we do, and that's the focus there. We also help with getting third-party vendors access into your environment. Also on the I would say on the left side there, the endpoint privilege manager. This is great because my background being an engineering as an administrator of a number of systems, I needed admin rights. However, oftentimes I didn't need full-blown admin rights to desktops and servers. So that's another component of CyberArk's solution is take away local admin rights, but provide least privilege, so and still empower me to be able to do what I need to do, maybe as a developer, as an administrator, as an engineer, with my device, but not necessarily give me all the access or more access than I need. But really what we're going to talk about today is CyberArk's Application Access Manager, and really that's around secrets management for your applications, for tools, for containers, and really DevOps-related items, perfectly like Ansible. The other point on this is when we look at CyberArk's solution, whether today you're more of an on-prem or organization where you've got more rack and stack servers, or you're in the mix where you're just dipping your toe a little bit into the cloud, or you're full cloud first, CyberArk solution fits in any one of those buckets and provides all of these solutions in one way or another in that environment or in that platform that you're leveraging. So that's who CyberArk is. But let's talk about secrets management. That's what we're really around this. The talk today is around. So let's talk about some of the challenges. I like to actually start out with my pipeline. And I like to use this as a good reference because, where does all the tools we have in, say, a DevOps pipeline or orchestration, we may have a developer or administrator of some sort. The developer might be using, in this case, in a DevOps pipeline, something like a Jenkins for my CI server that's using my source control and my build. That component there, Jenkins, needs a number of credentials. It needs credentials to access my source control. It needs credentials to be able to build the applications, maybe call my application repo, let's say Artifactory. I need secrets for that. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm going to need secrets in Ansible. I'm going to need secrets in Ansible, number of secrets in Ansible to be able to deploy my applications to all of my test regions, my prod, and so forth. The challenge with this is there's a number of secrets across all of these. And we have all these secrets in these different areas. How are we storing those secrets? I know for me, for a while, when I was using a lot of these tools and playing around with them, what do? I hard-coded them. The problem with that is we get into some challenges with hard-coded credentials. Now, each one of these tools has different ways to potentially leverage credentials. But if I'm just using something like Ansible Core, how am I losing that credential inside of that simple playbook that I'm using? And we'll talk about that a bit later of how I can make it a little easier for me to use secrets within my playbooks. But what is the ultimate challenge with this, and what is the problem when we start thinking about secrets management as a whole? And one of the items we talk about is this island of security. And let me explain that a little bit. So let's take, for example, I have my Kubernetes cluster, and I might be leveraging Kubernetes secrets in there. But I might need to use that same secret in something else, like maybe Ansible, or I'm actually running something in AWS, and I need to use that same credential in all those locations. This is an operational challenge. It's also a security concern. How do I make sure that I have the same security across all those environments? Some solutions offer really good, strong security. Some have native right out of the box, while others have a challenge in that space. Or the other thing that we come into is when the auditors come knocking our doors. I've experienced that in my past where I have had to work with, whether fortunately or unfortunately, with auditors. They're great people to work with, but sometimes when we don't meet the security regs of our organization, we also kind of have to kind of show the cobwebs in our closet at times. And we also need to make sure that we're auditing each one of those, and that becomes another operational impact. Now, we can glue these together. We can create scripts to make credentials used with all these different environments, but that's ultimately a management overhead and an operational impact to the teams that are supporting those credentials that they're going to be used with all these platforms. And we really have a problem here. How do we solve this problem? How do we get to a point where I can use a credential? I don't actually have to need to know what a credential is. I just need to be a reference of variable, and when I get that credential, I can use it. And that's really what it looks like from the solution perspective. So I've talked about a little about the problem, the space that we're in, the problem that we're dealing with, but let's talk about how do we fix this? What does the solution look like? So going back to that pipeline that I have here, I got my Jenkins, my Artifactory, and my Ansible Tower. What would make this all better? What would make it easier for me to use credentials for all of these? Well, we need some centralized location. We need a secrets management solution. We need to be able to centralize the management of those secrets. So let's say if I need a credential that's going to be used within my Jenkins and my Ansible Tower, I can centralize that. That gives me the governance around that. That's what CyberArk's been doing for, like I said, for the last 20 years, managing secrets, managing credentials, rotating those, making sure they have unique passwords whenever someone needs to use it. We're just talking a different persona here. We previously in CyberArk's, go back 5-10 years ago, we're talking about the human. Really, we're just talking about another carbon-based life form, a non-human. And Ansible Tower, Ansible, Jenkins, they're just a carbon-based life form. And we need to be able to get access to those secrets. We also need to have centralized auditing from that perspective, from a security perspective, because again, when those auditors come knocking on the door, when they ask us, okay, can you produce when the last time this password was rotated, we need to have that full audit trail to go along with that. Now, the other part of this is we need some way to dynamically retrieve it. And that's where I get excited about is how do I dynamically pull that credential in when I need it, and I don't have to have it sitting hard-coded in my playbooks or in my pipelines inside of Jenkins. And that's really what the solution is going to look like, is how do we address that? So now, if we take that a step further into what does it look like to retrieve those credentials? Well, I got my Ansible, whether it be Ansible Tower, Ansible Playbooks. Well, where does CyberArk's solution fit into this? So let's talk about the Enterprise Password Vault. So what does the Enterprise Password Vault provide for us? It provides centralized rotation, that monitoring, the audit of the credentials that are out there. It also provides management of those secrets and passwords that are in the environment. Role-based access. So when I need to access a credential, what I have access to is all I see. We need to extend that to Ansible. So we actually do that in two different ways. So the first way was we leverage it using our central credential provider. Now this is a web service. We do attribute-based authentication, and actually we have a number of authentications out of the box, and that's growing every day. It's 100 plus. I think we stopped counting after that. We also have our dynamic access provider. Now, this solution is a containerized-based solution. It uses two parts. It uses a token-based and an attribute-based authentication. It helps also because it does auto-scale with HA. So in the more, I would say, ephemeral environments, having a containerized solution is important. And we'll take a look at actually both of these today of what it looks like to leverage the central credential provider, which is just a endpoint or API endpoint that I can call and authenticate into, and then we can also look at that from a more of an ephemeral perspective. And all of these provide to Ansible a way to ultimately get those credentials that we're managing, we're rotating, and we're getting inside of the enterprise password vault. So let's talk specifically about some of these integrations. So out of the box, I think it's after Ansible 2.5, we actually have two lookups that are natively packaged with the solution from CyberArk. There is the CyberArk password, which leverages CyberArk's what we refer to as Application Identity Manager, which is that central credential provider. And then we have our conjure variable. And actually, I'll walk through both of these in the demonstration. Now, CyberArk's been investing in automation into making, moving away from having to do things a click by click by click. Let's take that power and let's extend that into even our own platforms. So even from the perspective of, I have a credential, and let's take a hypothetical, I have an application I'm spinning up, I need to go ahead and create a password for that. But now I've created that password, I need to store that somewhere. And that's where we start looking at the provisioning side, where Ansible Security Automation Toolkit that we have allows us to add users, add those accounts, add those credentials into the CyberArk Enterprise Password Vault. We can also trigger rotations off that. And so that's another add-on to the solution or into the integration that we have within Ansible. The other side of this is when I need to deploy CyberArk, we also have modules for being able to orchestrate that. So if I needed to deploy a new server, I can use Ansible to do that. So this is just kind of a highlight of some of the integrations we have with the solution. But let me go ahead and let's move into actually what does this look like? Let's walk through kind of a demonstration of some of these integrations that we have. Before I jump into there, is there any specific questions or comments that you guys have before we jump into a demonstration?
Do y'all support both Tower and the upstream open source product? I forget its name off the top of my head.
The Ansible Core open source? Yes, we do. And actually, I'll walk through both of those today. So what I'm going to show you initially is leveraging Ansible Tower in leveraging, I would say, more of the enterprise solution. However, I do want to give you guys a takeaway, right? So I want to give you guys something you can actually go do something today. CyberArk's solution, our dynamic access provider, is also built off of, in the same similar fashion, our Conjure open source. So our open source Conjure solution allows you to do secrets management. So I can set up a standalone Conjure solution and set up my Ansible Core, and I can basically get the same concepts we're going to walk through with Ansible Tower, and I'll walk through a scenario. But great question. All right, awesome. So let's go ahead and shift through and actually walk through what this looks like. All right, so it looks like I've timed out of my Ansible Tower, but let's go ahead and get logged in here. And I'll just walk through a couple integrations that I've already set up here. So first things first, I have a couple jobs that I've built out here, a couple templates that I have. Now, if you look at these templates, I've set up some projects. I'm using source control management for these. So for me to be able to run these and pull that from source control, my playbooks, I had to use a credential to get these to work. So if I look at this and say, for example, the first one we're going to talk about is my deploy. I have a little Go app that I'm going to deploy. And you can see here I'm pulling up that playbook, but it's under this project deploy Go. That project is using a credential to reach out to source control. So if I go ahead and look at my Go app here, I'm leveraging this GitLab connection. So that's my source control in this environment. I got a little GitLab server set up here. I need a credential to be able to get the source that I'm going to leverage here. This is the first credential that I'm going to need to use to get that source pulled into it so that I can run my template there. So the question comes is, okay, well, I can leverage a credential and I can hard code that inside of Ansible Tower. That's great. But if I need to use it somewhere else, maybe I have another tool, maybe in like a Jenkins where we might have similar access. Now, we probably would recommend having segregation of duties. We have account specifically for Ansible Tower, and we have one specifically for Jenkins, for example. The next challenge we get into here is if I hard code this in here and I need to rotate this, and how are we going to rotate that? Well, I'm going to have to come out here and update that credential here. So instead of having this credential, now I am referencing this as a credential that's inside of the Ansible Tower here. If we take a look at it, it's just my GitLab connection. But if I jump to my credentials here, and let's take a look at what it looks like and how I set this up. So let's specifically look at GitLab connection here. So if I open this one up here, you'll notice the username and password is using a nested credential or an object to be able to pull this. If I go ahead and take a look at this, so here's my Ansible dynamic access access here. If I take a quick look at my metadata, and this is where I'm saying use this credential, Ansible DAP access. That's what's going to authenticate to our dynamic access provider. But what I'm actually defining here is in a secret identifier. Now, this identifier is allowing me to reference a variable, a secret, that's being managed by our CyberArk dynamic access provider. So when I'm able to, say, reference this credential here, it's actually going to automatically populate and pull the result for that so that I have that when I run that. I can do a quick test here. It looks like we're good to go. That's awesome. So we do the same thing for a username and password. Now, if I take a look back at my credentials here, how do I do that lookup? What do I need to set that up? So we also have that Ansible DAP access. Here's that credential I'm referencing in there. If I take a look at this, in this case, this is out of the box. Now, if you go out there and if you have Ansible Tower right now, I think it's after, version 2.5 or a little bit later. If you go out there, you can go ahead and say, let me add a new credential. And actually, CyberArk Conjure Secret is one of those credential options there. There's also CyberArk AIM integration as well. But for me to set that up, I needed to go ahead and define my URL. Where am I going to access that credential? This web service, in this case, this container that's running this. I do need to define an encryption key. One of the things I really like about Ansible is when I put that encryption key in here, I can't see it anymore. So even though I've established an API key here, now we actually have additional ways to produce that API key if we need to, versus hard coding in this fashion here, this API key, because we need to rotate that. We can leverage that using another tool like a summon or things like that. But we've established that username. Now, the other thing we actually leverage here is mutual TLS. So when I make that call, I make sure that it's encrypted. Now, our solution has encryption at rest, but also making sure that's a mutual TLS connection when I retrieve that credential, not exposing that across the wire. So that's kind of the concept we're going to be leveraging here. The last thing I'll go ahead and hit here is I'm going to actually deploy my application on the Kubernetes. So I have a machine credential here, and this is going to be my Kubernetes K8's master credential, and I'm doing the exact same thing here. So if I take a look at that, go ahead and open this up and look at my metadata. I'm actually calling the same thing. I'm calling a path. That's where the secret's going to be, and that's going to produce that value for me. So let's go ahead and kick this one job off here. So let's go ahead and deploy my Go app here. And so when I run this application here, you'll notice obviously I'm referencing that K8's master secret. Now, that doesn't have a credential hard-coded there. It's actually on the call. It's dynamically going and doing and reaching out to the dynamic access provider and saying, hey, I need this credential. It's in this path. Do I have rights? It says, oh, let's see if Ansible, in this case Ansible Tower, has access to that. And so what we've done here is we have established trust. We have trusted as administrator. I've trusted Ansible Tower like I would trust Nick or Josh to be able to do some work. I've trusted those individuals to go ahead and do that. I've trusted Ansible to be able to retrieve these certain credentials. We've set segregation of duties of what it has access to. And I was successfully able to run my playbook here, and I was able to apply my manifest to my Kubernetes cluster. We're in business. And the nice thing about this is now I was leveraging something native right here. I was using a credential, but that credential was not having to be hard-coded into this platform. The other benefit is I can actually rotate that. And we will take a look a little bit later. I also have that audit trail that goes along with that. But this has been great, but let's actually take another look, and let me actually output what the password looks like, just to show you what that example is. So that's leveraging our dynamic access provider. It's that containerized solution, be able to pull that out. But sometimes we might look at another option where we have that central credential provider. That's going to be a web endpoint. It's more static in nature. It's more of a run that server in a component. And so whether, each solution fits a unique need, but let's take a look at this other one. So I want to be able to go ahead and pull out a credential. And this actually walks through the components a little bit deeper. So here's my Git credential. And all I have here is I have this in my GitLab is this playbook. So same process here. I'm going to be using that credential to call my GitLabs. So actually, let me jump over to my GitLabs real quick here and I'll actually look at that playbook here. So if I go into my CyberArk modules repo here and open up my playbook, it's pretty simple, but I like to use this one as an example because it kind of walks through kind of what we're doing in the background here when we're asking for a credential. And this is a little more basic, but this case here is I'm saying, all right, I need to use CyberArk credential. And when I'm doing that, I need to call. In this case, I am running this off of an EC2 host, but here is my EC2 host. This is where my service is running. And I'm going to go ahead and say, who am I? In this case, I'm Ansible. That's who I'm attesting to be when I'm running this script. And then I'm also going to say I'm querying the results. And so I'm saying I want to go ahead and query, and then ultimately for this L_admin account. I've also put a thing here. It's calling what safe that is and where that's located. And so let's go ahead and run this one, and let's see the results of this. Kick that job off, and it's going to go ahead, again, the same process here. In the background, when I kick this off, it's going to go ahead and make sure it gets the most updated repo that I have out there using that credential that's not having to be hard-coded into the Ansible platform here. And then, here enough, I was able to get the output. Not only do I get the output of the password, I can also get other metadata off of it. I can also go look at the machine that this is running off of. This is the address that account's associated with. So I could get the username, the password, maybe the domain that it's associated with, a little bit more metadata around that account so I can see, okay, this account's being used in what way and how is that being used. This provides me a way to do that. Now, this is all within Ansible Tower. This is great from, all right, if I want to leverage that, but maybe I just want to do something a little more, I would say, standalone. Maybe I'm just developing my own little project here. I don't necessarily want to have to stand up the full Ansible Tower. Plus, I don't probably have a license for it. I just want to do this more from Ansible Core. So let me shift over and let's talk about this for a minute from the perspective of just running this off of Ansible Core. So I went ahead and deployed Ansible Core on this CentOS machine here. So let's take a quick look at it. So let me go ahead and do a quick ls here. I'm right at the home directory. Let me go ahead and cat out. I got a simple playbook here. This simple playbook is just going to leverage the Conjur open source solution. The Conjur open source solution I've deployed and had set up. And all I'm basically leveraging here is a Conjur variable lookup. And I'll talk about that, where you can find the information here in a bit for how to set this up. But here's, I'm just doing a quick lookup. This is a lookup that's a plugin that's already native, a part of the solution. And I'm going to say, hey, let's go ahead and retrieve this access key that I need to get. Now, I could go ahead and play that, but the question is, okay, how am I authenticating this host? There's a number of ways we can actually establish an identity or bootstrap an identity on a host. I've actually statically configured this in this case, so let me just go and show you where that configuration is at. So under my conjur.config file, I've just established my host. Okay, so this is my DAP master. That's where I'm going to reach it, and then there's my certificate file here. That's where it's going to go reference it when I do that Conjur lookup. It's going to that Conjur variable. When I do that lookup, it's going to reference these files here. The other file here is my identity, and that's where I've established the identity for this host. I've established this at the machine, and this is really the login that I'm going to be leveraging. So when I run this script here, and this is just simply running Conjur open source and Ansible Core, I can just go ahead and do my Ansible playbook, and let's do my playbook. Just really simple here. Same process here. It's going to go ahead, reach out, and call our Conjur open source. So in this case, I never had to hard-code a credential in there, and it went ahead and returned the value of that. So here is my credential that I have there. So this has been great, but let's just shift for just a second and take a look at the Conjur interface, and we'll actually jump back to this for a second. So here's my Conjur UI. Let me go ahead and log in here. And this is for the enterprise version. If I was looking at more of the open source, it's going to be based off security as code. All of the policies I define are going to be based on a YAML file, and it's going to define who has access, what credentials we have in there. I'll take a look at it here in a second. But let's go down to my secrets here for a second here, and I'm going to go ahead and take a look at my API access key here. Well, here's my API access key. That's where I was referencing that secrets front-end API access key here. I can take a look at it here. Here's that password. Now, as an administrator, I can maybe change this. This is some. Just add something to that. Go ahead and save that. Let me just shift back here, and immediately I have that credential that's being in that playbook, and it's going to go ahead and update the value of that. So this is one of the ways we can use a centralized location to store those. So even if you had a number of passwords you want to leverage in your pipeline, you're just in a development dev environment, you can use the Conjur open source to be able to establish those credentials and then use that within your pipeline further on. And then you don't have to worry about having those hard-coded and statically configured inside of there. Now, the policies that are defined here, if we take a look at this, all right, so I just retrieved that credential here. We can see, okay, well, this is who has access to this credential. Well, it looks like my secrets front end is the owner of this. Looks like Kubernetes has access to it. I have a Jenkins server, and I have my Ansible. Now, this object here is a layer, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But if I come down here, I can see that we actually access that credential here. We can see that, in this case, my host here, which is my Ansible host, fetched this secret. Going back to what I mentioned earlier, I need to have an audit trail. When the auditors come knocking down my door and say, hey, when was this credential used? I can say, here's the audit. Here's the last time this credential was accessed. This is now we know who's accessed it, when they've accessed, how they've accessed it, and the environment. So now jumping up here, when we take a look at the solution as a whole, there's a couple of concepts I like to kind of lay out there. When we talk about users and groups, we're talking about me as a human. And then when we talk about host and layers, that's where we're defining host is really just a non-human identity, and a layer is going to be a group of hosts that are going to allow us to say, let's apply permissions to a group of hosts. This is great, but let's actually take a look at a policy. How do I define a policy? We look at security as code, like I mentioned earlier. So let's take a look at my policies. And I'm going to leverage Jenkins to deploy my policies here. So I'm going to go ahead and take a look at within my source, where are my policies? So let's take a quick look at my secrets.yaml file. Well, here is my YAML file. Here's my API access key. Now I have a number of different variables or paths that I have. And I'm going to go ahead and group that together with multiple variables in this front-end app. But really from there, I'm going to define a layer. In this case, this layer is my Ansible layer. Now, I have my Ansible Tower and my Ansible host, my Ansible Core, that are both being guaranteed permissions under this, but they both have access to these credentials. And that's how we're going to be able to provide it. Now, once I've defined a variable path, I need to populate that. I can simply just make an API call to populate that, or we actually have a CLI, a part of the open source, that I can just go ahead and populate the value of that credential. And so that is one of the ways why we can help to simplify, make it easier for instead of having to have credentials hard-coded into a pipeline, make it centralized in that environment. Now, like I mentioned, I was going to reference a couple of integrations. So when we talk about Ansible Tower, if you go out to the administration guide, you can go ahead and see that we have our CyberArk AIM secret lookup. Walk through the steps exactly how to set this up. So similar to we saw the other when I looked at the Conjur one. This is for the AIM one, and then here's for our Conjur secret lookup. So both of these are supported within the integration inside of Ansible, which is awesome. So you guys can take advantage of this right away. And with that, let me go ahead and pause. And any questions, comments?
Oh, this is good stuff.
Awesome. All right, cool. So let me go ahead and, that's pretty much what I had prepared for you guys. So let me go ahead and just kind of recap what we've kind of covered so far. So what we really talked about is, what is a secret management challenge? Like I mentioned earlier, there's a problem we have. It's this islands of security. And what I refer to that is that, each one of these tools now, we just focused on Ansible. We have Jenkins in there. I've got Kubernetes in there. I've got multiple DevOps tools that are in there. How do I get some sort of management around that? If I need to manage secrets in multiple places operationally, I'm going to pull out my hair. Well, I guess I've already pulled my hair out, so I'm kind of missing out on that. But I actually just grew out hair on my beard. But that's the problem. We have to manage secrets across multiple platforms. It becomes a challenge. We can try to glue them together with some glue code, but there's still a challenge there. We also have varying security within each platform that we're going to be able to, each tool that we're going to use. And we also need that centralized audit. And that's really what the solution provides. It provides that secrets management, so we can rotate that out behind the scenes, so when the application needs it, it's got the most relevant password. We have that full audit trail to go along, who's accessed what in the environment. We also provide a number of ways to authenticate and dynamically retrieve that. We've spoken today specifically on Ansible, but know that we also have integrations for AWS, Azure, Kubernetes. OpenShift is another strong partnership we have with Red Hat to be able to provide secrets into push to Kubernetes secrets, run a sidecar in OpenShift, and things like that. But we were able to demonstrate being able to retrieve that both through our central credential provider, which was that EC2 host that I had out there, and then leveraging our dynamic access provider to pull that secret and pull that credential. So what steps can you take now? So this has been great. Showed you some really cool stuff. I get excited about it because it makes my life easier, and that's one of the things that's awesome for me when I'm developing and when I'm messing around the lab. I have a way I can do secrets and put them in there, and at least I know they're centralized somewhere. But that's where the Conjur open source. So if you want to go ahead and kick the tires right now, if you go to conjur.org, you can walk through the integrations. So that CentOS host that I was running, I literally just followed the instructions off of our conjur.org site and set up that integration. Just takes a couple things. It requires a little module. Throw that in there. Go ahead and get you going there. Now, CyberArk has a number of DevOps. We specifically today talked about Ansible's integration that we have in there. There's a link here in the slides, and we can definitely share this out later, where you can go ahead and see those. If you just go to cyberark.com/marketplace, you can go ahead and see all of our integrations that we have out there. Like I mentioned a couple of those earlier. Here's a couple links to those integrations. So, for example, that CyberArk password lookup and the Conjur variable, both of those are available on the docs site of Ansible.com. And then also I provided a couple links here to the GitHubs for Ansible modules and the Conjur collection if you want to go right to the GitHub repositories we have there. And then I also referenced both of these here, which is going to be the automation from being able to create. Now, I showed you how to retrieve a credential. The next problem in this is how do we push a credential back up to the solution? That's where we start talking about the security automation modules where we can actually push and write a credential back into the CyberArk Vault and manage that way. Because I might actually be using Ansible to deploy infrastructure. Once I have that credential, I need to put that somewhere. So leveraging that as a centralized location to store that credential. And then also, if you are a customer or you're looking at when you become a customer, you want to deploy CyberArk's infrastructure, the PaaS Orchestrator is another great value add to get that repeatable. I don't want to click and build a server out. I want to know I have the same consistent results every time I deploy a server, specifically for the CyberArk solution as well. So with that, thank you, and I'd like to just go ahead and open it up to any questions.
Probably mostly related with security rather than your product. How does security keep credentials from changing when a pipeline is running, say, for example, in the middle of the pipeline? Is there a lock or something that keeps those credentials from changing at that point in time?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So one of the things you can do is you can schedule those, so you can have defined windows to when those credentials are going to be rotated. So let's say it's going to be 2 a.m. on a Sunday. Now you will require some coordination. We can also, from that credential, if somebody's using it, we can lock that out for that period of time if I'm using a credential, and then once I'm done for a period of time. So let's lock it for an hour, 2 hours, 4 hours once it's being used, and then unlock that credential. And then it could rotate that. Good question.
And I guess the other question that I had was around making sure the right people have access to things and they're able to reset things. The CyberArk provides that kind of support. Say we want a quorum of 2 people, making sure that if something happens, break the glass, reset credentials, an emergency kind of thing.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. CyberArk is an enterprise solution, so there's the fire call, break glass solutions. We provide, the security and the role based on that, but there's also where you can also provide segregation of duties and also dual control over accounts. So maybe it is a very risky account. You can do it from that perspective. I need 2 people to do that. Also, you can also have that break glass type of situation. Let's say there is a network outage or something like that. We're putting these secrets in some vault, right? How do I get that secret out if I need it? And say there's a network outage. That's exactly where we've designed the solution. So there's multiple ways to get that credential out. We're telling it more systematically through an API call. You can also go to an interface and pull that credential out, as well as other different ways to do that. And the backend infrastructure is designed to be highly available with a DR and HA capabilities.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
y'all provide a Docker image of your Conjure open source tool?
Yes, there is a Docker image already out there on there. So if you go out there, you can go ahead and deploy that.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, that was great, and obviously big thank you from me and everybody involved with the meetup for coming and presenting today. Any other questions that we want to catch on the recording? Going once, going twice.